a second time, which is great. And that's always an option. So I teach each lesson twice a week, first on Sunday, then again on Wednesday. And all of the lessons will be put into the course as recordings. So I will post one video class, and that's just me teaching. So that's just for if you like to connect to the human being that is my voice, if that's helpful for you. And then I put an audio file of each, the Sunday and the Wednesday class, because I teach them just slightly differently. Sometimes I learn a little bit from the first lesson, or I might teach them at a different pace. So just so you know, when you're navigating the recordings. So I also just want to say a little bit about how the live stream works. Sometimes I'll start with a short anatomy lesson, which we will do that today, or we might look at some other resource that will just really help us understand whatever the lesson gets us into. And then from there, we'll do the lesson, connect to ourselves, and then after the lesson, there is this option to stay for a Q&A. It's really free form. You can stay and just listen if you don't want to say anything. It's a time to hear what other people maybe experience, a time to perhaps have your experience be validated, and of course to ask questions. So just so you know, that's how we usually run the live stream. So welcome to those that are just joining right now. Before we get into the lesson, I am going to I'll share my screen to show some images of the pelvis and the pelvic floor. For today's lesson, it will be a back lying lesson. So you really just need a comfortable place to lie on the floor on your back. And then at the beginning here, we'll do a little bit of landmarking of different points of the pelvis. And I'll ask you to do that in sitting. And you could do that sitting on a chair, or you could do that sitting on the floor, cross-legged, something like that. So whatever's most comfortable. If you do have a chair nearby that just has a firm surface that you can sit on, that will work really well. All right, so I'm going to take a minute to share my screen. All right, can everybody see this okay? Great. Okay, so to give you a little context of what you're looking at here, this is the pelvis from the front. So if you're looking straight at a skeleton from the front, pelvis from the front. What's highlighted in blue is the pubic symphysis, which is more of a cartilage between the two right and left pubis. So the pelvis is made up of the pubis, the ischium, and the ilium. So the pubis, when I say pubic bone, it's a little confusing. People just say pubic bone, but what I'll be having you feel when I say pubic bone is, I'm going to draw here, is this sort of general area in the middle. So you'll feel the right pubis and the left pubis, and it sticks out just a little bit, the bone does. And you may also feel the pubic symphysis in the center. So that's the pubis or the pubic bone. Why we call it the pubic bone, I'm not sure. It's kind of a misnomer. So sorry, that's confusing. So then this that I just highlighted, the ilium, it's another part of your pelvis. And I'll just draw again, just to highlight the edge here, this sort of top crest or shelf of that. It's another place I'll have you feel in a moment. And then if we take this and just start to turn it around. So now you're looking at the back of the pelvis. Oops, sorry. Let me back up there. Go back here. Okay, so now you're looking at the back of the pelvis. And if it's really sitting, if you were really sitting, you'd be more like this. Okay, so this bone here is your sacrum. It's part of your spine. So it's the lower part of your spine that sits between the two halves of your pelvis. When you lie on your back and you feel your pelvis on the floor and you feel this kind of flat, bony part on the floor, that's your sacrum. And then just below that is your tailbone. And then if you're sitting right now, you might be able to feel this. Your sitting bones. So your sitting bones are just a bony landmark on your ischium that you feel when you sit. Okay, so if I take this and I rotate it again, actually, we're going to go this way. Sorry. I rotate it again. So now we're looking at the pelvic floor from up above. Okay, so the pelvic floor, I'll let you know what the boundaries of the pelvic floor are in just a moment. The pelvic floor, it's shaped kind of like a hammock. So these connective tissues, muscles that sort of swing from your sitting bone, from one sitting bone to the other, from your pubic bone in the front and your tail in the back. So let's look at, I know it gets kind of confusing as I rotate this around. I'm gonna get a good spot. Okay, I want to do it this way so I don't confuse you. I've floating pelvis in space. All right, there we go. So I'm going to draw some points that we'll think of as the boundaries of the pubic bone. So we've got, excuse me, of the pelvic floor. We've got the pubic bone, right? And like I said, that's the pubic symphysis, but we're calling it the pubic bone. We've got the two sitting bones, right and left. And then we have the tail that's highlighted in blue here already, but I'll put a little green dot there. So then if I draw a line between all of those points, it creates a diamond. And so we're going to think about those bony landmarks as the boundaries of the soft tissue of the pelvic floor. Now today and next week, we will also, in our imagination, split the pelvic floor in half. So there's a front triangle and there's a back triangle. The back triangle includes the anus, the front triangle includes the urethra, the vagina, the testicles. Okay, so I think that's enough information for your mind, your eyes. Any quick questions about that before we take a moment to actually feel those places on ourselves?
Just that was one of the best examples of pictures of a pelvic. It was really good.
Oh,
really
good.
good.
Even though I kept it so much.
It was fabulous.
I agree. I thought it was great.
Great. So just so you know, I edit that out as a single file. So if you ever want to go back and just watch that, if that's helpful for you, that's on the recordings. So could you just find a place to stand first? And bring your hands to the top crest of the pelvis, that area that I called a shelf. So oftentimes when people say put your hands on your hips, they put their hands here, even though this is not where your hips are. But if you find that top crest, it's right below your waist. And yeah, as you're standing, you don't need to look towards the screen. You can really just sort of look out at the horizon. And now just tip your pelvis a little forward and a little back so that you feel how this top crest moves, and noticing what else moves. Pubic bone, the tail. That's right. So as you tip it forward, the abdomen might move a little forward. As you tip it back, you might feel your lower back flattens a little. Notice how your back moves. Great. Okay, now just find either a firm chair to sit on, or you can sit on the floor. And sense your sitting bones. So remember, these mark the right and the left sides of the pelvic floor. So you could even slip one hand underneath and sort of with your fingers, sit on your fingers and feel one sitting bone and the other. Great. And then you can remove your hands from underneath if you have that. And now find a pubic bone in the front. So it's pretty low. If you're sitting on the floor, sitting cross-legged, your pelvis might be tipped back just a little bit, just because of how it is when we sit on the floor compared to a chair. And if it feels comfortable for you to keep a finger just touching your pubic bone, could you start to, again, tip your pelvis a little forward and a little back? So remember, the lower edge of the pubic bone marks the front of the pelvic floor. Great. And then you can bring your hands back. And if you want to try to feel your tail, you can. The tailbone goes pretty deep inside of us, but you might feel your sacrum and then walk your hands down and then just have an image of where your tail moves into you. And just do that same thing. Your hand could be back there or not. Just rocking the pelvis. Great. Great. And then put your hands wherever you want and close your eyes and see if you could draw an imaginary line between these 4 points. So we'll create a diamond. So you can think about the pubic bone in the front, draw a line over to your right sitting bone from there, a line from the right sitting bone back to your tail, from your tail over to your left sitting bone, and from your left sitting bone forward again to your pubic bone. And see if you can sense that diamond, how much space it is, how wide it is, the distance forward and back, and whatever surface you're sitting on might give you some feedback. And then could you draw a line from sitting bone to sitting bone so that in your image, that diamond is then divided into 2 triangles, a front and a back. Great. Okay, and go ahead and lie on your back, come to the floor. So during these lessons, it will just be really helpful to visualize where these places are. That's why I wanted to start with that. So come onto your back and lie with your legs long if that's comfortable. Otherwise, you can have your knees bent and your feet standing. That's right. And if your legs are long, have a little space between your legs. And just begin to notice the way that you meet the floor this evening. All the sensations created by your body. The floor beneath you, how gravity affects you. So as you start to settle in, whatever you're here for, pelvic floor health, just simply learning more via the Feldenkrais method, I ask you to be open to whatever shows up, whatever you encounter. So some new sensations might occur that you don't expect. And Feldenkrais always is really broadly aimed at the whole self, the whole human. So even if it seems like we are aiming our attention at a really specific body part, you might benefit in some way that you don't expect. Or you might feel a change somewhere completely different than where we brought our attention. All right, so we're going to draw a midline. Could you bring your attention to the space right between your eyes? Like right at the bridge of the nose. And start to draw a line, a midline down your nose, center of your nose, to your upper lip, to your lower lip, to your chin, down the center of the throat, down the center of the sternum, all the way to the belly button, down to your pubic bone. And then that imaginary line will naturally come between the separation of the two sides of the genitals, and that line moves down the midline of the pelvic floor, between the buttocks, and then up the center of the sacrum, up the lower back, up the middle part of your spine, between the shoulder blades, up the back of the neck, all the way up to the crown of the head, to the center of the forehead, and right back to that place between your eyes. So now you can think of the two sides of your body with this center line. And just notice any asymmetries. And asymmetries are things that every one of us feel. So you can start to notice what stands out about your relationship with the floor. Sense the pelvis on the right side compared to the left. The muscle tone in your lower back on the right side compared to the left. The ribs on your right and left side. And now can you start to think about this center line as it relates to your breathing? Is the idea even conceivable that you could sense any differences as you breathe, any differences on the right side compared to the left side as you breathe? And as you look for that, it's just your as is natural breath. Great. Continuing to think of the imaginary midline and your breath. And without changing the breath, notice, how does your abdomen move? How does it respond to your breath? And you can notice the two sides. And what does your chest do with your breathing? Is there any movement behind your collarbones? Is there movement towards the floor? And then take some time to give attention to how your breath creates a little pressure downward towards your pelvis, towards the pelvic floor, in the direction of your legs. And so see if you can feel the natural inhale creates just a little pressure downward towards the pelvis. And so you might end up very mildly changing your breath just so that you can feel or even imagine this little bit of pressure towards your pelvis. And then when you exhale, that sensation diminishes. And with that focus of the breath, notice, do you have any sensation of the pelvic floor? So when you inhale and give a little pressure downward towards the pelvic floor, is there any sensation there? And any answer is correct. So maybe yes, maybe no. Great. Now just let your breath do what feels natural and make a few very slow, quiet contractions of the pelvic floor. So you think of drawing the pelvic floor upward in the direction of your head gradually, and then you gradually let that go. So if you've ever been directed or taught to do Kegels, this is a lot less effort we're looking for a really gradual way of drawing up the pelvic floor, not a quick or a sharp contraction. And after you've done that, see if you can let it go also in this really gradual way, and even pause after you've let go so that you can feel you've completely relaxed before you repeat it again. And you can keep this really light and mild. So we will be more interested in seeing if it's possible to develop a really gradual sense of control rather than that sudden sharp contraction. And if this is all a little elusive right now, you can think of squeezing the bathroom sphincters, if that helps you find what you need, and then letting it all go, letting everything expand. Great. And you can really challenge yourself to take more time between each engagement. You might take a full extra breath cycle so that you can really listen for the moment that the pelvic floor feels passive before you engage again. And then I'll just ask you to add one more thing onto this. Can you try exhaling as you draw up the pelvic floor and inhaling as you let it relax and expand? So you exhale as you draw up the pelvic floor gradually, and you inhale as you let it relax and expand. And you could, again, take a full breath cycle between repetitions. Great, let that rest. And bend your knees now and stand your feet. And make sure that your feet don't feel like they're going to slip. So you're going to feel like you have some surface underneath you, or the feet won't slide too much, so that we can really minimize the effort in the legs. And we're looking for this skeletal support in this shape of the legs where you can really start to relax your thigh muscles and your hip muscles. So in this position, can you think of the middle of your back? Not your lower back, not your upper back, but somewhere that feels like the middle. And notice its relationship to the floor. And start to find a really small movement, something that lifts this area of the middle back away from the floor. And then you let it go and come back to neutral, and try this a few times. So your lower back will arch a little bit, your upper back will lift a little bit, and then you let it back down. Again, it's really mild. So if you create any kind of discomfort, you do it much smaller, more quietly. Just see if you can relax into this idea. So your head and your shoulders might respond. That's right. And so when you lift the middle back, both ends of the spine will be affected. Notice what your pelvis does with this little arching of the back. Did you have a question, Emmer?
Yeah. When I'm in that position on the floor with my knees bent for extended time, I get a lot of pain in my right hip. So I didn't know if there was a different position to be in. It doesn't bother me if I have my knees elevated, like my feet on something else.
Yeah, you could try that, and you could see if your feet can actually be kind of able to push into whatever they're on.
Okay.
At times, you can also do some of the exploration on your back,
Mhm.
and then just do it once or twice, and then roll to your side if being on your side feels
Mhm.
comfortable, roll to your side, take a break,
Okay.
and then come back onto your back. So you could also just play with taking up many more rests in a comfortable position.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Emma.
Thanks.
All right, so if you're still lifting that middle part of the spine, just let that go for a moment. But remember that spot that you were lifting. And now think about pressing that area back into the ground. So just gradually, and the front of you will fold a little bit. So you take the middle of your back and you move it back towards the ground and let it go. And so, Emma, you could actually do this on your side. What I'm asking right now, you'll just have to translate some of my directions.
Okay.
So as we're taking the middle back, the front of you will fold a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's for everybody. You can always translate my directions to a different position. So feel how your whole self organizes to this pushing of the middle back into the ground. And let's start to exhale as you do it. So you exhale, press the middle of the back into the floor, and then inhale, let it all go. And as you press back, you'll feel the abdominal shortening. The pubic bone might draw up a little towards the chest. And it's not such a big movement that you're lifting anything from the floor. Right. Okay. Let that go. Rest. You can take your legs long or rest in any position that feels comfortable. And just let your head roll a little bit side to side. Sense your jaw. You might open your mouth a little. Great. And bring the head back to the middle. Bend your knees and stand your feet again. And this time, cross your left leg over your right leg. And you have no space between the thighs. You can replace your right foot a little bit in this home position. And just take a breath here. And begin to tilt the legs, the knees a little bit to the left, and then back to the middle. So just what's easy. It's not looking for a stretch. And the weight of the legs are enough weight that your pelvis tips to the left. The weight rolls a little bit to the inside of the right foot. And you aren't holding the legs over there to the left to feel any stretch. Great. And when you come back to the middle, that home place, really feel that balanced place where you might be able to let go of some efforts before you tilt the knees again. Great. And now start to include your head. So as your knees tilt to the left, let your head roll a little to the left. And then you bring everything back home. And can you figure out as you do this through sensation, what muscular efforts bring you from being tilted to the left to the home base in the middle? So first you feel everything, the knees, the pelvis, the head is tilted decisively to the left, and then pause and feel what muscles do you recruit to come back home to the middle? Do you feel a shortening in the abdomen? Do you feel anything in the pelvic floor? Maybe it's your jaw that you feel. Great. So see if you can initiate bringing the knees and the head back to the middle by shortening the distance from your sternum to your pubic bone. So initiate. Great. Once you've done that a few times, uncross your legs, stand your feet, and just notice the echo of that. How has that influenced yourself? Good. Cross your right thigh over your left. And find a home base for this. So you can shift around where your left foot is. Good. And without rushing, start to tilt the legs to the right and letting your pelvis turn to the right. Great. And then you bring everything back and you feel how everything can balance in the middle. And go ahead and start to include your head. So the knees, the pelvis, and the head. Tilt to the right. And when you start to make your way back to the middle, notice what you recruit to come back to the middle. And if you ever feel a really focused or intense part of the body, one area of the body, or a discomfort, then you're doing too much, making the movement too big. So you can always imagine if you need to, if you're already feeling like you're doing it quite small. And so we're looking for, with every movement, how we can do it in a way that's pleasant for you so that you could continue this for hours if you wanted. And that may mean that you translate it into a slightly different shape. Great. That's right. So the knees and the head are just tilting to the right. We're staying with that side. And start to wonder, what are the contractions of the abdomen that happen to bring the knees back to the middle? And you can track the pressure on the back of your pelvis as it shifts to the right and back to the middle. Great. Okay, let that go. Uncross your legs. And you can either rest with your feet standing or your legs long. Choose what feels good for you. Good. Sense your breath. And you'll bend your knees again, have your feet standing, and make sure your feet are at least hips width. And keeping this distance between your knees, can you shift both knees a little to the left and then back to the middle? So you're making sure your knees are bent and your feet are standing, so your legs aren't long anymore. Yeah, so you shift both knees a little to the left and then back to the middle. And so your hip joints are not constricted by the crossing of the legs. So there are more variables for movement. So as your knees tilt to the left, can you let the length of your whole self respond? And you can let your head tilt to the left. You're not breathing with any sort of extra effort. Yeah. And again, we're just tilting to the left right now. So see if you can tune into the range of movement so that you feel it's very pleasant and really simple. We want to make it feel really simple so that as I introduce another layer, you're already starting at an easy place. Good. So the next time you tilt your knees to the left, to initiate your return home, can you find a light drawing up of the pelvic floor, really gradually? As your knees approach home, let's say maybe you're at that maximum contraction. Once you reach home, let go of all the efforts, completely let go. So the goal in between movements is to find the most relaxed pelvic floor you can find. And only then, when the pelvic floor is relaxed, do you tilt the knees to the left again. And then you engage the pelvic floor slowly to initiate the knees coming back to the middle. That's right. It's as if the knees move from the effort of the pelvic floor. Pelvic floor effort increases as you drift the knees to home, and the pelvic floor lets go completely as you're in the middle. And again, you can start to look about yourself. When you engage the pelvic floor, are there any assistants? Do you feel your abdomen engage in some way, or any leg muscles? Great. Okay, let that rest. Go ahead and let your legs lengthen. So when we engage the pelvic floor, the sphincters of the pelvic floor engage, and the way that we are connected throughout our whole self, we have many sphincters. We have, I believe it's 60 sphincters in the body. So there's sphincters in the mouth, and they often engage a little bit when we engage the pelvic floor. So you might notice things happening in your face. Great. Bring your hands down to your low belly and just listen to the soft rising and falling. And maybe give about 10 or 20% emphasis to that deep belly breath, that invitation to expand the lower belly, expand near the basin of the pelvis, just feeling as if there's a ball that you inflate in the pelvis on each inhale. And then on the exhale, that releases. And specifically in this context, with each inhale, can you think of relaxing the sphincters of the pelvic floor? So there are sphincters in the front and the back. And you can think of all of those sphincters getting a little easier, perhaps wider. And whatever sense of ease you're finding, it doesn't need to disappear as you exhale. So each inhale invites more softness underneath all of it. And as you keep playing with that, so we're looking for this sensation of what does the pelvic floor feel like when it's fully relaxed? What does my pelvic floor feel like when it's fully relaxed? So I'll just say a little bit about many people that have trouble with the pelvic floor. There's this common misunderstanding that it's about a weakness, but most often it's not that it's weak, but that it's always so tense. And so there's no dynamic control over it. It's hard to let it go. It's hard to engage it. And as we are playing with the pelvic floor, you can think of a dimmer switch, right? You have a light switch that you can turn on or off, and then you have a dimmer switch, and you can be very nuanced with the mood. So we want to think about that with the pelvic floor, like how nuanced can we be? So right now you're just feeling how much can you let go? Okay, bend the knees, stay on the feet again. Find that really simple skeletal support for your knees to be bent and your feet standing. And start to tilt the knees to the right and then gradually bring them back home. You can feel how the weight shifts on your feet. And as the knees tilt to the right, there's that pathway of shifting weight towards the right side of the pelvis. So just follow that, how your weight shifts across the back of the pelvis as your knees tilt. So as you do this, knees tilting to the right, listen to your skeleton and let the soft tissue get out of the way so that the weight of your legs does pull your pelvis. It pulls your spine. It affects each of your ribs, your head. So how much of your skeletal frame can you feel is connected to this tipping of the knees to the right? Good. Now tilt the knees some amount to the right, maybe not as far as you've been going, and your head can be a little to the right too. So, but you're clearly off to the right. Now, lightly in this position, can you lift the middle of the back a little bit? Remember when we did that? So you lightly arch yourself in this position and then let that come down, and just do it a few times. So in a really distributed way, you arch the back a little bit. Great. Bring your knees back to the middle for a moment. Sense your breath. And then again, tilt the knees to the right, tilt the head to the right. Keep yourself biased to the right like this. And slowly press the middle of your back into the floor. So let it shorten your front. And as you press the middle of the back into the floor, what happens to your knees? So listen for it. Do they tilt more to the right, towards the floor, or do they come towards the middle? Great. And then maybe try alternating once. Lift the middle of the back, feel where your knees go, and then press the middle back and feel where your knees go. Great. Slowly let that rest. Bring the knees back to the middle. Take your legs long for a moment. So there we were just looking at these bigger flexor and extensor muscles of the spine and how that affects your legs. Good. Bend your knees one more time, stand your feet. And so don't do anything specific with the back this time. Again, tilt your knees to the right. And this time, as you initiate the knees back to home, could you start to draw up the pelvic floor gradually? Once you're home, let that contraction completely melt away. And that might take 1 or 2 breath cycles for everyone. And then again, tilt the knees to the right and initiate the pelvic floor to move the knees back home. So you slowly dial the tone up, dial the muscle tone or engagement up in order to bring the knees back to the middle, and then practice slowly letting go. Good. Okay, let that go. Take your legs long. So you might be noticing as you attempt to engage the pelvic floor that other auxiliary muscles are engaging. So just stay curious about that. Okay, so we'll keep the left leg long. Now bend just your right knee, stand your right foot. And tilt your right knee a little off to the right and back to the middle. So just what's easy. So we are not trying to isolate the thigh within the hip joint. So as you tilt your knee to the right, your pelvis and your spine can respond to the tilt. So you can let your belly shift a little to the right. You can let your head shift to the right. And again, as you return the knee back to home, could you gently draw up the pelvic floor? Once the knee is poised in the middle, you let the pelvic floor go. And you don't tilt the knee to the right until you feel the pelvic floor has really turned off. That's right. So our capacity to turn on the pelvic floor and let it go is exactly what we're interested in. Great. Lengthen your right leg. So let both legs rest long. And notice your breathing as it is. Imagine that your breath could start to reach all the way down into your right hip joint, all the way to the right side of your pelvic floor. And this could just be in your imagination. If you imagine that you had a long lung that went all the way to your right hip, and you focus that movement of your inhale down into the right hip, are there any sensations that come from that in the pelvic floor on the right side? Great. You can let that image go and bend your left knee, stand your left foot. And just gradually start to tip your left knee to the left and really take time to enjoy it, feeling your whole self, your pelvis and your belly can shift a little to the left as the weight of the leg goes to the left. So again, it's not an isolation of your leg in your pelvis, but let everything respond to the weight of the tilting leg. Yeah, and right now just feel, what do you do spontaneously to bring the knee back to balance, to bring the foot to stand and to bring the left knee back towards the ceiling? So without this engagement of the pelvic floor, what is it that brings the knee back home? Can you look for that? And yeah, many people might feel the inner thigh muscle, but there's probably some other things too. Great. So go ahead and start to layer in the engagement of the pelvic floor as you bring your left knee back to the middle or to standing. You engage the pelvic floor and then take as much time as you need to feel the pelvic floor get really neutral, get really passive before you tilt the knee to the left again. Yeah, can you keep a soft face as you're engaging the pelvic floor? Great. Gently let that go. Take your legs long. And as you rest, could you again create this image of breathing all the way down into your left hip, the left hip joint, the left side of the pelvic floor? So it's not an instruction where you're forcing or trying even to make anything happen. It's like you've just installed a little image and notice how you feel. How that image can change how you feel. Great. So again, bend your knees and stand your feet. So both feet this time. Find that nice skeletal architecture of standing the feet that gives you that effortless sense in the leg muscles and the groin. The deep belly is soft. And now lightly tilt both knees a little bit away from each other. So the two knees widen just a little bit away from each other, and then they tilt a little towards one another. So both knees at the same time. So it's a symmetric movement. Both knees go a little wider, and then both knees come towards each other. And just take some time to get to know this movement. It's actually quite different from what we have been focusing on. So when we do something with two sides of the body, it creates a completely different organization. So can you notice, you might want to go slower. How does your pelvis shift on the floor when your knees go wide? And how does your pelvis shift on the floor when your knees come towards each other? Great. So continue this, moving the knees apart and then towards one another, and start to layer in the drawing in of the pelvic floor as the initiator and organizer to bring the knees from the wide position back towards each other. And then from that balanced position of the knees, or maybe the knees are even resting on each other, the inner knees might even be touching. Can you take the time to completely release the pelvic floor? And then with a relaxed pelvic floor, widen your knees. Initiate the pelvic floor to initiate the knees coming towards each other. So as your knees are moving wide, you're doing that with the softest, most relaxed pelvic floor you can feel. And as the knees come towards one another, you use the pelvic floor to bring the knees together. Great, great. Okay, let that rest unless you're just so curious and you want to keep doing it for a little while. Otherwise, take a moment to rest. So there's seemingly simple movements, but we're bringing a lot of detailed attention. So we take these, we intersperse rests between this focused, subtle movement so that your brain has a little bit of time to integrate. So as you rest here, enjoy the breath as it is and notice where do you feel the breath now? Do you locate it any differently than at the beginning? Great. And from this resting position, really lightly, slightly start to drop the pelvic floor, just a little of what you can do, just a little, and sustain it. And as you sustain that lifting of the pelvic floor, listen to your breathing. Is it possible to sense the effect on the breath as you engage the pelvic floor? Good. Let that go. Let it fully relax. So it's really healthy. It's really important, of course, to be able to engage the pelvic floor, but it can also create a lot of difficulties if it's held really tight. So let it go for a moment. And once again, slightly drop the pelvic floor, engage it, sustain that engagement, and listen as you stay there. How do you breathe? And is there any extraneous effort that you can relax? Yeah, are your feet doing something? Do your thighs, your quads engage to engage the pelvic floor? Is that necessary? Your teeth, your tongue, your eyes. Yeah, let it relax if you haven't already. And just try it one more time. Get really curious. So you engage the pelvic floor a little bit, you sustain it. And then you notice, can you keep sustaining it and relax some unnecessary efforts? Great. Okay, let that go. So see what maybe you learned something new about yourself there. It's not to judge, oh, I was really clenching my jaw while I did that. That's super great information if that's what you found or whatever it is that you found, right? So we're bringing awareness. Okay, so one more time, bend your knees and stand your feet. And sense the breath throughout yourself. And really slightly engage your back so that you lift the middle of the back. You slightly arch the back, let your head and your tail be nudged by that. Maybe you can feel it's a movement that's really distributed throughout your whole spine. Good. Let that go. And now try pressing the middle of the back into the floor, or you move the middle of the back backward and let the front of you fold a little together. And then you let it go and you do it a few times. And then if you start to alternate this, lifting the middle of the back away from the floor and then pressing the middle of the back towards the floor. So it's a light arching and flexing of the spine. And as you do it, start to notice how your pelvis rocks a little. Great. Okay, pause. Keep your knees bent and your feet standing. So maybe listen first before you try this. So you'll tilt your pelvis to flatten your lower back. And as you do that, can you draw up the pelvic floor and then let it go and bring everything back to neutral? So a few times, tilt the pelvis to bring the lower back towards the floor as you gradually engage the pelvic floor. And recall that image of the pelvic floor like a diamond. So the sitting bones are the right and left boundaries of width. And then we're imagining that there's a front and a back of that diamond. There's a front triangle and a back triangle. So as you tilt the pelvis and bring the lower back into the floor, could you think of tightening only the back half of the pelvic floor? So a contraction of your anus, and of course, you'll likely feel everything contract, but can the anal sphincter be at the center of your attention, the center of your learning and playing with this? So that as you tilt the pelvis and bring the lower back to the floor, you're trying to clarify that back triangle a little. And of course, you come to neutral and try to relax in between movements. Yeah, and the breath, can it stay simple? The neck, the jaw, the face, can it stay relaxed? Right. Pause for a moment. Let that go. Keep your feet standing. Just roll your head a little right and left. Okay, so now we'll do something a little bit the opposite. So you'll start to tilt your pelvis downward so that your lower back lifts a little bit. And as you do that, think of engaging the front half of the triangle. And then you roll your pelvis back to neutral and let go. So as your lower back lifts a little bit, you think of squeezing, engaging the front of the pelvic floor. So you have one or two sphincters, depending on your structure. And completely relax as you come back to neutral with the pelvis. Yeah, and as you continue that, can you make it more gradual, more breathable? Great. Let that rest and just let your knees, your legs sway a little side to side, and you can let the whole body respond. Kind of wash away any tension that came. And let your head again turn a little side to side. Great. Now take your legs long or rest in your most comfortable resting position. And just notice what all of this has created in you. So without judgment, even if there are questions or if there's confusion or boredom, like let all of that be there. So what is your sensory experience in this moment? And that includes your body, that includes your emotional experience of a lesson like this, your thought experience, ideas, concepts. Okay, so take your time, bend your knees, roll to your side, and come up to sit. And from sitting, take your time to come up to stand. Take as much time as you need. If you're so comfortable on your back and you want to stay there, you're always welcome to do that also. Great. So if you're up on your feet, just start to feel, what's the action of standing like right now? How do your feet support you? How do you sense your pelvic floor in the field of gravity now? Can you feel the weight of your pelvic floor? And even invite the image of the pelvic floor expanding, widening, softening as you breathe. And you can trust that in this quiet environment, you will know if you release it too much. Great. Now slowly a few times draw the pelvic floor up and then let it down. So gravity is now supporting the letting down of the pelvic floor. So go real gradual, do less than you can. It's not important that you make this a really large movement. Can you keep your breath simple as you do it? Nice. And let that go when you're ready, and just take a little walk. Spread your awareness a little bit as you walk throughout your space, and just notice what stands out for you. So as you're walking, I'll just say these are a few little post-lesson notes. After a lesson like this, you might feel in the next few days that you notice your pelvic floor is more contracted than necessary. So noticing that is normal and super useful. So that noticing of extraneous effort is the first step to reducing the excess effort. Also, in a lesson like this, many students feel like they need to take a bathroom break. So that's also really common. So if that was true for you, no worries. Also, an emotional component can come up, right? These are really personal lessons. So I invite you to just stay curious about that. And of course, you can stay for conversation if you have any questions. So I'll end our lesson there. Thanks everyone for